saying, as most of us here know, we're a very diverse, not only medical staff, but also clinical staff as well, and diverse with culture, with different faiths, even some of our folks from different countries that they recently have gotten here as well. But even more importantly is the fact that our patients come from very diverse places as well, with their cultures as well, with their faith communities, and again, some of them new arrivals to this country as well. And I think with that comes a responsibility as colleagues with one another to building bridges, and also especially with our patients in regards to the way we communicate, the way we understand them, if we're going to be true healers as well. So, saying that with you, I wanted to introduce you folks and understand a little bit about the three wise guys, and there they are sitting in front of you. And let me start out by saying we have a Christian minister, a Jewish rabbi, and an Islamic imam. Their story began years ago when they befriended one another. And they did that for the true understanding of wanting to really be more clear about the different religious perspectives that they each were coming from. Very different. And they evolved as friends, and that friendship deepened. They also realized their responsibility of saying, hey, if we're doing it with each other, we should really do this with the community. And actually, their histories show that as well with other communities before they even got to Central Florida. But with that, and with the fact that they've grown within the community to get this word out, it's even gotten to the point where they have their own radio show. And it's on WMFE, which is the NPR local station here, 90.7. And this is a plug for them. It's on the first Sunday of the month at 6 p.m. And it is live screened on the WMFE website. And also, they archive it onto their website. And their website is, let's see, you guys have it on here? Oh, there it is, right here, the3wiseguys.com. So they've evolved not only to that point, but continue to thrive in this area as well. Now, brief introduction. We have, first of all, the Rabbi Stephen Engel, who I'm going to refer a little bit to my notes here, who is the rabbi of the Congregation of Reform Judaism here in town. And in addition, he served other communities in Columbus, Ohio, and also in Jackson, Mississippi. And I might note that he was rather active in helping to bridge building bridges in areas that were very profoundly broken, and that's quite a story in itself. In addition, he is the president of the Greater Orlando Board of Rabbis. Next, Reverend Brian Fullwider. He has served congregations for over 25 years in Colorado, Arkansas, and here in Florida. And he's been at the First Congregation Church of Winter Park for the last 13 years. Again, his persona, if I may, is reaching out to the community and building bridges. And I should also like to add, he's done this in a very real way, being very much involved and, in fact, president of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida. Last is, and certainly not least, is Imam Mohammed Musri. He is the senior imam and president of the Islamic Society of Central Florida. In addition to that, he oversees 10 mosques here in Central Florida with over 40,000 Muslims as well. He also is the founder and president of the preparation school. Did I get that right, Mohammed? Okay. Preparatory school, excuse me, as well as being running the Muslim Social Services and also the Peace Institute. What I'm really saying here is that they know how to build bridges with each other. And I think we do a reasonable job here, but we could do better. And I think we could learn how to build bridges with each other in dealing with our patients and doing a better job even with our patients and understanding them better. Saying that, if you could give a warm welcome to the two ladies.
Rebuttal? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, rebuttal time.
Well, usually we go from oldest to youngest.
Is that religion or age? True.
But since he got to put the program, he put me first. He always goes first. So anyway, basically, who are we? As a group, we have developed this friendship over more than a dozen years. We have worked together on many projects. We had events at our respective congregations where our communities visited with each other. And we felt that that has to be taken further, and we started this awesome radio show. We tried to come up with a good name for it, and it was, whose idea was it?
Ryan's.
We both agree it was his. I don't know how wise we are, but we are wise in the sense of being friends. We overlook the differences and focus on the similarities, which are the majority of our dealings. We have strong friendship, and we have over the last 12 years developed the sense of responsibility towards the community that we have to transfer that friendship to people. People should have similar friendship and appreciate the value of it. We feel there is too much tension in our country and the world between people of different religions and people of different political ideologies. We see deadlock. We see a lot of tension that could be easily resolved if people would do what we do all the time, sit and talk and look at the commonalities that we have. And so we wanted to be role models. We don't want to just talk about it. We want to be examples of it. And we wanted to address the many issues that people think we as a society are at odds with each other. And every show, we discover how similar we are on many ideas. And we believe in the same God. We belong to the same Father, Abraham. And we represent, honestly, the majority of the people in the world between our combined faith. And we feel we have this sense of responsibility right here in Orlando to start something that has been done before in Spain, in other times and other places, but we want to revive it and make an example of it today. We don't know how many such examples exist around the country, but we hope other people will do exactly what we do or even improve on it. And our hope is to translate this into the community over time, that people of different faith and different ethnic backgrounds can really build strong friendships and not be uptight about discussing faith. Faith is easy, is something basic, and people should not be really afraid to discuss it in an open way. And I will turn it to Brian to carry on with.
They gave me one too. Okay. Steve is special, so he has the rabbi is mic'd with a lapel. But I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues and with you all tonight. The interfaith journey for me has been a really wonderful part of my own faith experience over the years. And coming to Orlando just helped to kind of take that to the next level. I had found as a Christian, grew up in a Methodist home and was raised in a pretty evangelical kind of church, and my devotional life and faith life has been an important part of who I am and have been growing up. Went to a small, liberal arts Christian college in Arkansas, and so the journey for me has been very much a kind of traditional American Christian kind of journey, as maybe it's been for many in terms of how we kind of develop. As I moved from seminary out to the community to serve as a local church pastor in Arkansas, now nearly 30 years ago, I began to find that not only did the Methodists and Episcopals and Baptists and Unitarians and other folks need to get along with each other, but also people from different faith traditions needed to learn to get along. And so I began working in Arkansas with what was then, actually in the early days when I first went to Arkansas as a student, it was the Council of Churches and Synagogues, the Arkansas Council of Churches, and it was just the Christian denominations. When I came back from seminary, it had become the Conference of Churches and Synagogues, and so the Jewish and Christian communities had gotten together and realized that it was really essential and important to work together as people of faith around the good of the community. And what we always said in those days was we focus on what we can agree on, and there's a lot that we can agree on. There are a lot of needs in the community, there are a lot of issues, a lot of things that people are dealing with that it really doesn't matter what your faith tradition is or if you have any faith tradition at all. We can work together to make it a better community out of each of our own faith traditions. While I was there, I ended up becoming very involved with that group, and we began to do trialogues around the state with the Islamic community. And so we had the Jewish Christian Islamic community. By the time we got to the point of finally writing the charter for the Arkansas Interfaith Conference, we had not only the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic communities, but also Buddhist communities, and at that point, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints came in. They had not been part of that, and so the Mormon Church came into that group. It was interesting to me during those days, as the Jewish and Christian groups began to move toward working together, there was a large Christian church group that left the organization. And as the Islamic and the Buddhist and the Mormon groups came in, there was another Christian denomination that left the fold. And what was so disheartening to me about that is that as a Christian and as a pastor in the Christian tradition, I really understand that we who are in the majority need to really listen to our sisters and brothers who are part of minority religious groups. Because William Sloane Coffin said this years ago, minority people understand majority people far better than majority people understand minority people. And the truth is that we have, I think, sort of a sacred trust within the Christian tradition to be people who are listening and learning and getting to know our neighbors and friends from different traditions. And it really breaks my heart. I'm the one who I'm the middle child in this group, by the way. So we've got older brother, younger brother. I'm the middle child. So I have all the problems that the middle children have. One of them is, it's many, but one of them is that I really feel a need to apologize, sort of, sometimes for the way that I often see Christians behave in terms of people of other faith traditions, because it's heartbreaking to me when I see the way that the loudest and biggest voice in our country, in the U.S., which is based on the principles and understandings of someone who taught love and forgiveness and acceptance and renewal and new life and the spiritual path, that gets so turned around to break faith in a sense of connection with other people. So all of that just to say the journey has continued here in a wonderful way with these colleagues and in the work that we've been able to do together in the larger community. And we're looking forward to spending a little time with you all this evening and visiting. So thank you. Oh, you've got your...
Actually, it reminded me they have handheld mics, and I have a lavalier mic. And I don't know if you remember that movie Annie Hall. Do you remember the scene where the Christian family is sitting and they're really quiet eating dinner and please pass the mustard and the ketchup, and then they do a shot of the Jewish family and they're screaming and they're yelling and they're making noise, and it's sort of like it reminded me why I don't need a handheld mic. But I want to talk about also, since the Reverend took a little bit of my time, I noticed that Christian ministers talk a lot longer than imams and rabbis. But we all have a lot to apologize for. But I wanted to just share a little bit of what I've gotten out of our relationship, besides deep friendship and admiration and respect. And one of the things that I've learned, which is probably something that people don't think about, is that, you know, when we have conversations with each other about the things that are similar and the things that are different, I'm talking about real conversations, not hello, how you doing? The real kind of conversations that we every once in a while have, you know, when you feel that moment where you're going to a level with a person where they're really opening up and you're really opening up, is that sometimes people feel like threatened by that kind of a conversation. I have found that in my conversation with my friend, the Reverend and the Imam, that what it's done for me in my own personal Judaism, it's strengthened me as a Jew, and it hasn't weakened me. So I think when we talk about differences, it also makes us think about who we are and what we believe. And I'm sure that as caregivers and healthcare advocates and professionals, that when you're working with a patient of another religion, it stirs in you some things about your own faith, your own belief system, your own value system, and I think that's really important to reach that. I'm sure you do that much more often as you're dealing with sometimes critical health issues and life and death issues of people. It makes you really evaluate yourself. So this relationship has allowed me to evaluate myself much more. The other thing that it's done is that we entered this in the belief that, you know, religion gets a really bad name. All we see in the media is we see radicals, whether they're radical Jews, radical Christians, or radical Muslims. That's the view that we get in the news story. How often do you see, you know, an Islamic group feeding the hungry somewhere or doing something good in the community? It never appears on TV. So part of our reason for getting together is that we believe that most people of faith, no matter who they are, no matter whether they're Jewish or Muslim, Christian, Sikh, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever their religious faith, that there are people of good religion who can sit down reasonably and have a discussion, who can disagree. Our relationship isn't all lovey-dovey, you know, we love you all, you're all wonderful, let's all go out and have dinner together. Our relationship is a lot deeper than that. So as leaders, we feel like we want to represent, and we call it good religion, because we believe there's too much done in the name of bad religion, and that most of the people who are religious are good and decent people, and even when they disagree. That's the second thing. And the third thing is, I'm speaking from a very personal perspective now, is that, you know, as a Jew, and growing up as a Jew in the Jewish community, I don't have to tell you all of the tension that has existed throughout recent history. And this isn't past history, this is recent history. And I'm going to just focus on my friend the Imam for a minute. All the tension that exists between the Muslim and Jewish communities, whether it's surrounding the Middle East or Israel or places in this country, there's a lot of things and a lot of tension between the Jewish and the Muslim community. But one of the things that I've learned from this relationship is that I get my understanding of the faith not from the news or the media or by what other Jews say or what people tell me. I get it from a person that I know, an individual. And my impression of Islam is my friend the imam. So when someone says to me as a Jew, Muslims are or Christians are, I say, well, maybe that's what you believe, but the people that I know, and particularly religious leaders that represent their tradition, that's how I base my impression of what is a Muslim, what is a Christian, what is a Buddhist. So I've learned that too, and that's been a really important lesson for me, because we all grow up with all kinds of things that are said about other people's religions. So that's sort of a little bit of, so you know a little bit of who we are. We'd like to spend the time with you tonight really doing what we do on the radio. And that is for the three of us to have a conversation with each other. And then usually people tweet in or Facebook in or whatever, or email, but you have the direct access tonight. So as a listener, we're going to pretend that we're doing a radio show. You're the listeners, and we're going to want you to send us questions during our discussion. So raise your hand or call out or whatever. Remember, in my congregation, I know the same as yours, but if your cell phone goes off during this presentation, it's an automatic $10,000 donation to the Three Wise Guys. So it's really up to you whether you want to keep your phone on or not. It's your choice. You will be a sponsor on the radio show. So in talking with Dr. Guarneri, there's a lot that we could talk about, but we thought that we would like to talk about the work that he does and the department that he works in. So tonight we're really going to cover three topics. We're first going to talk about, from our religious perspectives, we're going to talk about the topic of mind, body, and spirit. What do our traditions say about the healing field? What history do we have in our traditions about healing and about the mind and the body and the spirit? And how do those three things work independently, or how do they work together? And then the second topic we want to talk about, because this may be practical in your work, is we want to talk about the beginning and sort of the end, and then we're going to talk about the middle. So we're going to talk about the beginning and ends of life. We're going to share from our religious perspectives a little bit about when do we believe life begins, and what do we believe about when life ends. These are issues that you all deal with every day. So we don't represent all the religious groups, but we represent three major religions, and we're going to talk about some of the similarities and differences that we have. I sometimes egg on the imam and the reverend, and it'll work that way. And the third one is we will talk about the in-between. We want to spend a little time talking about when a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian offers a healing prayer in a hospital or in a room or in a home. What is that prayer? Who is it speaking to, and what does it say? And how does God interact in this? And how do human beings become part of this discussion? And what is the community's role in healing as a nation and also as an Orlando community? So those are the three topics. So we're going to begin. If you don't have any questions about us, which I'm sure you do, you're wondering who are these guys and what are they doing? We're going to, without the microphones and without the studio, we're going to start to engage in a discussion about mind, body, and spirit. And we're going to start from the perspective, and we interrupt each other, by the way, so feel free to do that as well. What do some of the major religious traditions believe about what are the histories in our traditions about healing and mind, body, and spirit? So we're going to turn it over to the imam because, he's going to go first the whole time today. So imam, the Reverend and I were wondering what does Islamic traditions say about, are there history of doctors, physicians in your tradition, and what's the history of that in the health fields?
Most societies, they didn't have medicine developed as a discipline, but when people got sick, they went to the leader of the community or the spiritual leader, thinking probably that person was possessed in some way. People believed in...
Possessed in a good way.
Spiritual, supernatural, powers. And so there was the medicine man. People thought that leaders have special gifts to heal the sick. When Islam came around, it built on the tradition that the body gets sick because of some imbalances, and that there are different ways that you treat that. What we call the prophetic medicine, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, over 1400 years ago, he said you have to take care of your body, and you have to take care of your spirit, okay? And you have to take care of your mind, and keep them in balance. If one overtakes the other, that imbalance results in some kind of sickness. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's spiritual or mental. And often we see medicine as just dealing with the physical. But in Islam, we believe the human being is composed of three components. One is the physical body, called the badan. Another is the person within the body, within this vehicle, called the nafs, which in
Nefesh is in
Nefesh,
Hebrew and Judaism
in Hebrew.
is similar.
And the third is the life force, the ruh, which is something mysterious. It's something from God that He places in the human being when the human being starts its life and takes away at the end of life. And that's despite the existence of the physical body, even in perfect condition, if the third element, the ruh, is taken out, the body becomes lifeless. So we tried to deal with the two. The third one, we have no control over it. And we don't have much knowledge about it either. We deal with the physical body by looking at what we eat. So the Prophet recommends certain things we should eat and certain things we should avoid. And those are also mentioned in the Quran, our scriptures, where certain foods are prohibited. Intoxicants, for example, are all prohibited outright. All addictive drugs are prohibited. But we also don't eat pork because we don't believe it's God made it for human consumption.
There's only one pork eater amongst us.
I'm going to take you guys out for a ham.
We take other things. For example, the Prophet said, if you eat, eat modestly. Don't fill up your stomach. The worst container to fill is your stomach. Should have 1/3 for your food, 1/3 for water, and 1/3 to breathe, for air. He encouraged us to fast, give our digestive system a break because it works 365 days a year. So we fast during the month of Ramadan. And of course, there are exemptions for that, for those who are already sick. And he strongly recommended that we should take medicine when we're sick. He said, for every sickness that God created, there is a treatment, there is a medicine. So seek it, find it, and get treated. Except death. He said there is no treatment for death, because that is when God actually takes that spirit or that ruh away. So you can't do anything about it. No one can. That ignited this idea that Muslims should pursue medicine, that there are treatments, we just have to discover where they are.
Is that why professional, like I know, there's some people have argued in the sense of, we probably all know there are many Jewish doctors. Are there many Jewish Muslims in a disproportionate number, for instance, choose to go to medicine because of some of the treatments?
Indeed, we have disproportionate number of doctors compared to the size of our community. And that is because medicine is thought of as a very noble profession, as a form of worship. When God mentioned Adam and his two sons who fought each other and one killed the other, he enacted a law that said if anyone kills a human being, it is as if he killed all of the human beings. And if he saved one life, it is as if he saved all the lives of all human beings. So when a doctor is doing her or his best to save a life, they are really getting the reward for saving all of the human race. They are worshiping God in that respect. So it's not just a profession. It's a very noble cause.
I don't know if Reverend in yours, like in Jewish tradition, your body is considered, for all intents and purposes, it's a rental. You rent your body from God, and when you die, you give it back. And in between, you're supposed to take care of your body because it doesn't really belong to you. And it's similar in Judaism that you have a nefesh, you have a soul that makes you uniquely who you are. So when you treat the physical body, you also have to treat the soul. And if you want to think of it like a personality, and I'm sure there are some patients, every patient has their own personality. So you're not only treating the body, you're treating the personality. So when you die, you have to give the body back in better or the same condition that you received. And there's a caveat, there's a little asterisk that says minus wear and tear. So, which means you don't drink to excess, you take care of your body, you exercise, you eat properly, not just because you're going to live longer, but because there's a respect of the body that there is. And in Jewish tradition, in terms of physicians, there's something taken from the Talmud, which is an ancient text, some 1,500 years old. It says, never live in a city that doesn't have a charity collective, that doesn't have a school, or doesn't have a doctor. So you cannot live in a city that doesn't have a doctor. That's the importance of, obviously, the educational.
Doesn't require a rabbi?
It doesn't require, actually, most of Judaism doesn't require a rabbi.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I don't say that a lot,
Yeah.
but it's mostly you don't really need a rabbi for anything.
You guys really need to do better on your public relations
I
stuff.
know. You don't need a rabbi.
Christianity is
Yeah.
definitely like, oh yeah.
Yeah,
you
I
have
am
a
not
minister
an, I
there.
am not an intermediary. I'm just like every other Jew. I'm just a little more educated.
And in Christian tradition, the same thing as both
You have rentals?
you, Rabbi, and Imam are saying. The body's a temple is kind of the way that it often is discussed. It's kind of a biblical phrase out of Christian scripture that the body's a temple and you're to care for it with that same kind of reverence and so on. We need to add the wear and tear asterisk because I think that's helpful. But and I think one of the things that we deal with in our culture and society in regard to the whole body, mind, spirit issue is that we have been such inheritors in many ways of this kind of dualistic thinking that, here's the body, it's one thing, here's the spirit, it's one thing. They're kind of two separate realities. I mean, a guy named Descartes, kind of started all that or really helped push it along. But I think we're in an age and a time when we really understand that this is a holistic process, that as you all are talking about, that body and spirit and mind are an integrated reality, and the care of all of those together is essential. And I think healing is sort of central to all of our traditions. Obviously, Jesus was known as a miracle worker and a healer. Oftentimes, the stories of miracle working are about healings, and often those are physical healings. And as the Imam said, that was usually characterized as some kind of demonic possession or something like that. And then there was this kind of calling forth of wholeness and healing to get rid of whatever it was. And I think, translated today, we would say that those demonic possessions are generally understood as biological processes of ailment of some sort that need to be treated and dealt with. But there is certainly a spiritual aspect to that, I think.
But there is a difference between healing and curing, though. And that enters into it, I think.
It is. The central belief in the faith is that God is the healer. God is the one who is the real doctor. He is the one who owns the body, who knows the body, created the body, understands the body. And our human knowledge about the human body is still very limited. But we have to do two things. One is do our best in diagnosing the problem and taking the appropriate medicine for it. And second is pray to God to do the rest. We cannot neglect one or the other. We have to always do both. So when we walk into a patient room or we visit, which is one of the rights of a person in the community who is sick, is to visit them, you have to make sure they are getting the proper treatment. And number two, you want to pray for them or ask them to pray for themselves because God can hear them. And
I hear one of the differences that and we're getting sort of in the third area in a little bit, but the idea, does God, this is a little more of a traditional interpretation of text, is that God comes down and fixes people? No.
Not really, but God does not have to go anywhere. God can affect change from wherever He is. We don't know exactly how and where. But we know that God is the one who decided to create us. He designed this body with his infinite knowledge. And when something is wrong, he's the one who really knows how to fix it. So he may guide you to get the right treatment, to go to the right doctor, to follow the right, strategy. And at the same time, it is an issue of faith, where you have to believe that you're going to get healed. Okay? You have to have a positive spirit that God will take you through this and will deliver you through it.
It's sort of this. Well, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, now, when you say God is the real healer, the real physician, you know we're in a room full of doctors, right? just wanted to say. Go ahead.
Now, I was going to say that, when I tell my congregants, they say, well, Rabbi, we have a prayer called the Mishe Berak prayer. It's a traditional prayer. It's a Mishe Berak Abutain. Blessed God, who our blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, send healing to this person. And the congregants always say, Rabbi, do I pray and God's going to come and fix it? And my answer is no. That's a very sort of literal interpretation of healing. And what I tell them is, and maybe there is agreement or disagreement amongst us, but it's not that God's going to come down. You pray to God, God comes down and fixes you, because if it doesn't happen, either you're a bad prayer or God doesn't like you, right? There's some disconnect there. And so it may be, and I think you were touching on it, Imam, and tell me if I'm right, is that, God puts the potential inside a doctor to have the knowledge and the ability to heal. God puts inside human beings the ability to have compassion, to be a caregiver for another person. And when we pray, and the patient has amazing strength inside themselves for their own sense of healing and wholeness. And what we're saying is not for God to come down and fix the person, but for all those things that God had placed inside the people to kick in. To become...
The Muslim doctor thinks of themselves as, I am doing the work of God. And before they start, they have this prayer for God to guide them, to understand, to diagnose right, to prescribe right. They don't believe I know it all. And they don't believe that it's all my work. But that God will help me and guide me to understand what's going on, to diagnose it right, to prescribe right, and to also help the patient to actually accept my advice. If you take that attitude that I'm a tool for God to do good work, number one, when you fail, you don't blame yourself, okay? Because it's not really up to you to fully heal the person or not. That is, you tried your best, and if your patient died between your hands, it wasn't your fault. As long as you did your best.
Rabbi, how about you? And then we're going to open up to some questions, because we've dealt with a lot of stuff. And I know you've been listening on the radio. You're ready to tweet and Facebook and all that.
Let's
so how about...
let's go to questions. I saw somebody here and over there.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what the different faith traditions believe about unanswered prayer. As you were saying, in other words, in a hospital situation, not uncommon for someone of faith to enlist friends, family, perhaps their caregiver, to provide prayer for a chaplain that may be in the hospital. So I'm curious, if that prayer, from a human perspective, goes unanswered, namely, the result was not the result that we sought. How is that viewed? What's the perspective from different faith traditions?
You want to start?
Well, yeah, we're going to get into the whole issue of prayer a little later, although we can kind of jump into it partly because it's a big topic. But for me, on the issue of the healing kind of prayer out of Christian tradition, I think there are at least two or three things always happening in that experience. One is, and this is where I think as religious leaders and also as people in the medical profession, it's important to sort of step back a little bit and listen to what it is the person is really needing in relation to this moment of prayer. So it's really, in many ways, their understanding of what they think prayer is doing with and for them, and how that's happening. Now, I think there's a teachable moment in that, in terms of being able to help them understand that sometimes we can pray for healing and it doesn't occur, and we have to understand that. I used to have a friend talk about capital H healing and small h healing, and that if the capital H healing doesn't happen, the big whatever it is, that cancer or whatever it is we're hoping we can get past, then maybe we have to find the ways that we're healed spiritually, emotionally, in terms of relationships, other things that are part of that process. I came up against this as a young person. I was 16 years old, firmly believed that if you did the prayers as it was sort of prescribed in the New Testament, got the elders together, anointed with oil, did the various kinds of things that are kind of clearly outlined in the New Testament, and if you prayed fervently and honestly and sincerely for healing and did those things, then healing would occur. Ask and you shall receive, kind of thing. And my faith was met sort of with a kind of locomotive train of reality when the 6-year-old child of my pastor growing up died of cancer. And we had done all those things. We had all-night prayer vigils and gathered around and called the elders together, did everything that we were supposed to do. And this 6-year-old child died. And I had to come up against, as a very young person, this question. And in some ways, it's probably what led me into ministry, or part of what led me into ministry, was wrestling with this question about how do we deal with the reality from our perception that God is not answering prayers. I mean, what kind of God doesn't answer prayer on behalf of a 6-year-old child? It's kind of my question. So when you come up against the real life issues, I think, and I really had to rethink my theology at that point, and I have a very different understanding of God today as a result of that journey of thinking. Now, for me, God is love, ultimate renewal and healing in the spiritual sense. But physically, I don't really know. There's some amazing things that happen physically, and some people get past some things that seem impossible, and other people don't. And that's not God, from my point of view, saying you're okay or you're not okay. I mean, so I don't. It's a very tough one when you're dealing with this in the practical sense with people. So, and I think we have to really get our theology out and take a look at it, no matter what theological framework we're working from.
I think that's the most difficult. Your question is based on someone's theology. Some people do have a belief that if they pray that God's going to answer and do what they ask to do. And I one of the things that we've learned is I don't make a judgment about that. If that's not my personal perspective, but if someone believes that way, and so it's hard for me, having a different belief system, to try to give them the right answer, given a different theology. The other part of that question is that sometimes I mentioned before, sometimes we do mix up, and I'm sure you experience this, healing and curing. Because, in my rabbinate in 25 years, one of the most important lessons that I learned was the difference between those two. Because I've had people that, have had cancer and have eventually died, but they found a sense of healing not only for themselves, but for all the people that survived them. So sometimes someone could be at peace and still know they're going to die of cancer, and still find and get those prayers answered in a different way than curing. And again, I go back to that idea of prayer being not just for the person who's sick, but to rile all of those potentials that God has placed in the world. To me, like Ryan, God is compassion, justice, kindness, all of those things. And we all have those things in us. And for some of us, we see that people exhibit those things all the time. And sometimes a family suffers a terrible crisis, and those things come to the surface. So I believe that all of those things are there. And as people, we can help people either through prayer or other means to bring those things, whether it's, when a person feels loved and valued and cared about, they can feel healed, even though they may eventually still die of the disease, or it may be crippling to them. So it's a very complex question. I'm not trying to avoid it, but it very much depends on, and that's the difficulty when we have a different theology than our patient does or our congregant does, and we try to see it from the other person's side. And I know Dr. Guarneri, when we interviewed him on the show, we asked him about, as a Catholic, there's certain things, you have a certain value system and belief. How do you deal with your patients? And he said to go where the patient is and see, because that's your responsibility. It's not to push your personal theology on someone, but try to meet them where they are. That's the real service that you can do to someone, and not make them believe the way that you believe. Other questions?
My question kind of comes at that from a different angle, and that's the notion of disease as sin, or disease as punishment for sin, which I went to Sunday school to learn that we're not supposed to think that, but Christians think that all the time. I'd be interested in
All religions think that, I think.
about that, and how we tie into it with, not only I had to smoke, but I had the lung cancer, I exercise with the heart attack, how you help your members of your churches and mosques, and you know what I'm saying? How you help your flock with that notion?
Well, we do believe that most of the things that happen to us, the bad things or the things we consider to be bad, are byproduct of our choices. In other words, it is not God's intent to punish us with some disease or pain, but He sets the standard, and when we deviate from that, there are consequences, and we end up paying for our choices. So if I do smoke and I go against medical advice or religious advice, where in Islam also smoking is prohibited, then I have to bear the consequences. Now, we believe that at the same time, God tests people all the time. And some of these tests are in terms of medical ailments, okay? And to see how they would react. Would they be accepting, or would they be upset with God? To test the people around them, their family members, their reaction. Do they show support or not? To test the community. So not necessarily in any way a punishment for anyone. Nobody did anything wrong, but it's outside anybody's control. But the person actually, or a group of people, got sick. Say the flu spread in a community and start wiping out people. It wasn't really my choice or your choice to go out and get infected. So in those moments, it is a test for a lot of people. How are we going to all exhibit the right choices? So we say in general, what comes good is from God, and your mistakes catch up to you sooner or later.
Yeah, what I would, and this is one of the places where the Imam and I respectfully disagree, because I don't believe that God has causal efficacy on those kinds of things happening. I don't. Now, what I would say is, in the idea of testing, not that God causes it to happen, but that there is, within those difficult things in life and the painful things, unjustified suffering, which we can agree that not everything, right, is the cause of somebody having strayed off the path or something. Sometimes it's just innocent suffering, right? And so when there's that, I would characterize it, rather than a test from God, a test about how we live our lives faithfully in the face of those kinds of things. That would be the way that I would talk about that in terms of the faith tradition question. So it's just one of those places. And if I hadn't said that, the rabbi would have said, "Come on, let you and him fight." So I had to go ahead and just jump in and say that.
But also, a little bit of a disclaimer is that, just to, from the beginning, we probably should say we don't represent our total religion.
Right.
So, I don't represent what every Jew would say. I have a particular perspective within Jewish tradition, There are some that would feel different. We find that some of the differences are those who are sort of more literalist and fundamentalist. I would have less in common with a Jew like that than I would with the imam and the reverend. And there's a lot I'm not, making judgments about, and also answer to your question, I remember, after 9/11, people were saying, well, where was God? Why did God allow it to happen? And a lot of the commentators and the people said God wasn't found in the cause of it, but God was found with all the people who were rescuing and the medical personnel and the police officers and the ambulance drivers. So, it's a different way of looking at it, and God's found in different places.
Yes, you kind of, my question is twofold. You talk about how each of you represent different strands of different
Sure.
faith and traditions. And so we're getting interpretations. And many of you have mentioned your holy books that you refer to, that you interpret, that others of your same particular group may not agree with you.
Right, on some issues, but we try to talk in sort of ways that most would agree with.
So there is a general, is it the majority of this particular faith group that...
I'm talking from my perspective as a Jew. I feel that when I express something, it's pretty much the majority of a very large percentage of the Jewish community. And in every religion, what we know is that there are sort of people who use the religion for other purposes, and we discount those people from being able to, interpret the tradition to the antithesis of what, if religion teaches love and compassion and justice, and someone uses it to go kill someone, they have now gone outside the bounds of an interpretation.
And
But my second question is, say you have a physician who is an imam or a doctor. His interpretation does not agree with the majority of his particular faith group because his reality, as you once said, does not conform with the interpretation. He's got a patient. He's had this interpretation from his major group that has said thus and thus. But reality doesn't fit that.
on your first point, I do want to say that I think that, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, which they do all the time.
We will.
But I think that Judaism and Islam do have the benefit of a little bit more of that broad consistency, the kind of general understandings, as Steve was talking about. I think that's probably, and I think that's fair.
Right, because we only have 3 streams and you have like 500.
But when you get in, first of all, you get into Protestant and Catholic, and then you get, there are 30-some thousand Protestant denominations in the world. So when you get into that kind of diversity, obviously, in some of those 36,000 or whatever the number is today are, it's like me and one other guy, right? We're a denomination, but we have a very clear belief about what we understand. So I think Christianity, particularly in the U.S., but I'm going to say worldwide, with 2 billion or so folk, really hits the waterfront. So when you get to the physician, the question of the physician comes maybe not from a broad stream of thought within any tradition, but Christianity. I think it's hard. I think Christianity is much harder.
There is another part of this is that, and this is an area of contention, perhaps not between us, but we found in our discussions, we've talked about genetic engineering in the medical field and in vitro fertilization and abortion and all kinds of issues that we've talked about. We address them all. And part of what we have found is that all of our religious traditions, there are, and some may disagree, there are not many absolutes. There's an absolute, thou shalt not murder. That's pretty clear, right? But when it comes to a lot of these issues, like the physician, there is sort of like 2 points, and there's a lot of gray in between, and we have to decide where we lie in the reality of the world between these positions. So we are the 3 of us sort of learned together that when someone says, this is absolutely what Islam says, or Judaism or Christianity, that's not true in any religion. There's a lot of areas that you can make the decision based on your own realities. There's continuum. You can't go past here, you can't go past here, but in between, there's all this area because every life situation is so different and so unique and so individual. So if there's a value here and a value here that are absolute, there's a lot in between. Would you say that in a lot of our discussions about particularly medical issues?
Yeah, one more thing on the physician approach kind of piece, which I think is, because I have to say that there are folks within the Christian tradition that if they came in and sort of laid out their thoughts about what was going on in terms of faith with me, I would probably be less in tune with some of those folks than I would with maybe people from another faith tradition who were a little bit more open and a little bit more accepting of various beliefs. So I just want to say, I think if I'm speaking to any physicians here who, the key is to not lay our stuff on somebody else, but listen, and I would say the same to religious leaders, by the way, to not lay our stuff on people, but to listen to where they are and help them to move through there. I think we really, and Christianity is one of our big tenets is evangelism, telling people about Jesus and what they ought to believe. And so that can become very seductive in terms of this is an opportunity. And I particularly am concerned when somebody is at a very vulnerable place. It's like when somebody comes in for counseling. You want to be very careful that you don't, lay your own ideas on them because they're in a really vulnerable place and they may just, it's not really fair.
I want to make sure we keep moving. There are other questions on this subject, this first topic that we touched on? I think, anybody? Any tweets out there? We're going to move on to the next topic, though.
I just have a question that you were saying that things happen because of choices that are made by people, and maybe things are done so other people can, that you can learn from their mistakes and that. How does that relate to children and babies being sick? Because they don't make the choices. And people who have these children and babies, I don't think, I try not to think that God does that to have these parents understand maybe they made a mistake on doing that.
Yeah, I don't say that everything that happens is because of the choices we made. There are choices that other people make around us, and it affects us. It could be secondhand smoke that gets me the cancer. I didn't smoke. It could be the mother that was smoking or taking drugs that affects the fetus and the baby later on. But the idea there is, where would medicine be if we don't have this cause and effect kind of relationship? If we want to trace the problem and try to address the source of the problem, we have to believe that everything that happens is there is a cause for it. We may or may not know it immediately. As our medical knowledge advances, we are learning a lot more about,
but the cause may not
causes.
be what someone does, though, right? I mean, you
Right.
can have a genetic, something in your DNA
exactly.
that causes you to have something, too.
So that was in an answer to the idea, is what happened a punishment from God? Absolutely not. Okay? We don't tell a patient, God doesn't like you and punishing you by doing this to you. But we know there's something that caused this. This is not normal. And we have to search for the cause. And maybe somebody else can avoid that in the future.
Okay, let's move into life. When does life begin and when does life end? I know that many of you deal with this issue, and it would be interesting, perhaps, I hope it will be, for you to learn from our faith traditions when we define, because we have very specific definitions over thousands of years or hundreds of years of history. Do you want to start, since you're in the middle?
Yeah, well, I mean, I take mine from another rabbi friend. I won't blame it on Rabbi Engel, who said life begins, when the kids move out and the dog dies. But
that's an old Jewish
that's
expression.
an old. Okay, all right. So
my wife is very upset by that. By the way, our dog is 13, and says,
do
not say
do
that.
Do not say that. That's right. On the issue of the beginning of life within Christian thought, obviously, we, again, because of the great, vast variety of thinking within Christianity, we're all over the board on this. It starts everywhere in some conversations from conception, the moment of conception, and that's life has begun, that very moment that the egg is fertilized by the sperm, to some ideas that, when we can hear the beating heart, to some other kinds of biological realities, to the moment that a child is born and takes its first breath. So you have all of that. And I think it's a very complicated question. Sometimes I say, I think life really begins for a human coming into the world, or potentially coming into the world, when those who are bringing it into the world truly love it and want it and desire it and are ready to embrace this human and be a part of this life and share and love. And
you have like 100 different interpretations. It's so hard to be a Christian.
But it's really hard. It's really hard. It's hard in so many ways, but that's
in Judaism, this is one you asked the diversity. There's consensus here. In Jewish tradition, and the consensus is for 2,000 years plus, that in Jewish tradition, life, a full life, it's called the nefesh, it's similar, I think, in Islamic thought, is that a nefesh is when the head crowns light. It's defined in Jewish tradition. That doesn't mean that before that time that the fetus is nothing. It says clearly in Jewish tradition that it's not mere water. That's exact translation from the tradition. So it does have a status. It does have certain things that you're responsible toward. But it's not a full human life until the head crowns. Of course, in the exceptions of, you could tell us more, but breech birth and other things, there are, variations of that. But that's when Jewish tradition defines, and that's universal throughout all of Jewish tradition.
When it's a full life. Well, of course it depends on what you're trying to define life to be. If we are defining life to be when the spirit, that ruh, enters the body, it is clearly in the prophetic saying that when it's 42 nights from the moment of conception, the ruh is brought by angels to the body. And that human being is now both nafs and body and ruh.
So 6 weeks.
6 weeks. And then when it exits, when the angel of death actually takes that ruh out, that is the moment of death. Regardless if the body is still being supported by machines, still warm.
How is that defined, the angel of death?
Well, today medically, they do probably test on the brain, and they see no brain activity to tell that it's gone. There's nobody there.
In Jewish tradition, was an imperfect way, is that I'm sure you've heard about traditions where the feather is put under the nose. And if the feather moved, then the person was alive, and if not. And there are stories in the tradition from more ancient times where people were probably not dead. And
so in terms of definition of rights, first, we are alive in the knowledge of God way before our time of actual conception or birth. And there is a passage in the Quran where God said that He took all of the seeds of Adam from his back and spoke to them. Am I not your Lord? And they said, yes, you are. He said, so that you wouldn't come on the day of judgment and say, we didn't know. So there was a moment where, we as in the knowledge of God, as seeds in our first father, Adam, we existed. But in terms of right, there are no rights there. There are no rights at conception. There are rights at 42 nights when that human being is now alive with the ruh in it. And those rights are not the same as when that person is born and took his or her first breath. Now they have new rights, and those rights develop when they reach puberty, where they become fully responsible and have rights of maturity, not at 18 or 21, but at the moment or the time of their maturity. And there are rights that go beyond also death that continue for a person that have to be respected and have to be guarded, that don't expire by their physical body expiring.
Let's open it up for questions. I know this probably lends itself to a lot of different kinds of situations that maybe that you deal with, and end-of-life issues or beginning-of-life issues.
Yeah, in regards to what we call this reproductive technologies, the artificial way of conception at times as well. And I know we could probably.
No, I'm laughing because this is where the imam and reverend really got into it. In vitro fertilization.
So you set John up for this question.
Yeah,
is that
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Good. All right. Let's agree this time.
Well, no, I mean, I think we've had this discussion. I'm just going to not speak for everyone, but you know, life is primary to all of our traditions. So that which you can do to bring life in some of our traditions, the commandment or the obligation to be fruitful, multiply is primary. Without life, there is nothing. So we all have agreement about bringing life about. So a lot of those methods, artificial methods, which were given by God anyway, the ability to have knowledge to create these things, came from, you know, our faith traditions. And then we get into the issues which the disagreement is, you know, like who can, you know, for in vitro fertilization, does it have to be the husband, or can it be some other person, like from a sperm bank? And you can see where this is where the imam, the reverend, really got into it. So there's agreement about the use of the technologies, but I mean, we could, you know, if you want to, we discuss this, but then we get into intricacies about
and it's interesting.
The specifics.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, John, because when I came out of seminary, we had not really dealt with this 27, 28 years ago. And it was just really beginning. The whole question of ethics and religion and science and so on was just starting. And I had a couple call me, and they had difficulty conceiving, and they wanted to know if our faith tradition would allow for them to use in vitro fertilization. You know, and I was like in my 20s and my early ministry, and you know, I walked in. Yeah, I knew nothing, and I walked in. And I didn't know what the conversation was. I just knew that they wanted to talk. I thought, you know, they were going to be a normal couple just having some marital problems. But no, they wanted to talk about in vitro fertilization. So we sat down and talked about it. And what I finally said to them was, you know, I believe that you know, if your love leads you to try this as the way to have a child because you really want to have a child together, God is obviously going to bless that. If it can happen and help you to raise that child as a person of love and kindness and faith. So, you know, that was my answer. But when we get into the question of the larger ethical issues of who can be involved in this, and what about the single mother who wants to have a child and wants to find a donor, whether it's a sperm donor bank or someone else, you know, those are the questions I think that we have some differences on. I'm you know, and the imam and I kind of had a conversation about the fact that we
it wasn't a conversation.
It was an argument. Okay, and we differ on it, but it was a really respectful argument.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, he had to take me to lunch.
Yeah, I did have to buy him lunch later, though. Yeah.
There are guidelines in the law to the purpose of the marriage, which among its purposes is to procreate. And if there is a physical disability or reason to prevent that, and there is a medical way to allow that to happen, it's all good. However, if something is in the law actually not accepted, you shall not commit adultery. And if I'm going to do it in a different way now, some mechanical way or technological way, it is still considered adultery. And it is not accepted. So if the husband and the wife having difficulty and they resorted to a technology that would help them have a child, This is, after all, their child, their bodies. We are not creating anything new. We are just aiding the process. However, if they're not married, it's no different than two individuals who are not married going out and having sex and producing a child that is, in the law, illegitimate. Because there are so many laws that are built on such a relationship, meaning the rights of that child on the parents, on both parents, and the rights of the parents on that child. There are inheritance laws. There are a bunch of laws that are defined by the fact that this is your child. You're responsible for it. And if I don't know who the father is, when people come and say, I don't know who the father is, and that is a problem for society today. We all, as taxpayers, have to support so many children that we don't know who fathered them. And that is a social problem, economic problem, on top of being moral problem.
Yeah, but there are also people who are quite capable
He doesn't give it up.
caring. I just don't give up. Who are quite capable of caring for the children that they bring into the world on their own and do that. And so,
There is no problem for caring. If I want to care for a child that's not mine, or an orphan, that's highly encouraged and rewarded. But for me, as a man, to go out and cause that to happen, or my sperms to be donated to a bank that will be used, that child has a right to know who their father is. And that's basic human right. We all know who our parents are. They should know. It should not be something ambiguous. I mean, when I listened to the story of Steve Jobs, how he lived all his life not knowing who his father is, even though he ran into him. That is heartbreaking, especially for a child. It's the right of the child first.
Other questions in this area? Life beginning and ending? Yes. Mm-hmm. That's very clear in our, Brian, the Reverend has a little bit more of a problem because Muslims and Jews have a whole text tradition and then a whole law tradition based on. So it's very clear. In Judaism, it's called pekuach nefesh, saving of life. Every single law in Judaism can be broken to save or life or health, with the exception of murder, incest, or idolatry. You can't commit those. But any other law can be broken or swayed. So in the case of organ donation, if it can be proven that it saves a life, like a heart, a liver, a kidney, there's no question that it's perfectly appropriate. In fact, it's obligated in order to save a life. Now, you get into, I said before, there are no absolutes. So the gray area is, what about corneas? Is a cornea saving of a life in any way? Some people could argue that it is. Some people argue that it isn't. So that's where, when we get into specific organs, some are very clear, and then some are very unclear.
I would agree with the rabbi that, in principle, as long as your organ donation is saving a life, it grows from just being okay to being should be done. I mean, if I'm dead, I'm not going to use any of these organs, but at the same time, I may save 1 or 2 or 3 lives for sure. Check.
Unfortunately, we know that other than corneas after you die, but the other organs have to be decided upon while the person still has some life in them. Yeah. So that becomes part of the issue.
I mean, is that, and Imam, is that in the writings, in the tradition as authoritative, or in the teachings?
In the teachings, yeah. There was no transplants.
You're right. Okay, so it's right.
100 years ago.
Yeah. So it hasn't Like,
But the body of the text, like the rabbi said, based on the Quran having certain principles that, or objectives that should be met. And one of them is saving a life. That if you're, they think, for example, if someone, you're going to give them some water and save their lives, and another person going to give them the water, it's not going to make a difference. You give it to the person who you're going to save their lives.
so in modern Islam, though, the idea would be that this is acceptable. That
So
generally
through
speaking,
conferences of both medical doctors and Islamic scholars, these issues get discussed annually. Those things are brought to the fore and in very specific details, and then a worldwide consensus are built around certain clear issues. Among them, organ donations have been considered to be acceptable, and there are questions when you are alive and you're donating. How does that affect your life? You may donate a kidney, but not a heart, or kill yourself to save somebody else.
Yeah, within Christianity, I mean, the broader issue that the rabbi mentioned in regard to some kind of authoritative way to capture these ideas, the only authoritative material, and it's even up for question among some, but generally speaking, 2 billion Christians, Catholic and Protestant groups would say there are 27 books that are understood as canon of New Testament scripture that generally are understood to be the books that guide faith, practice, life, and so on. Fair to say that? Looking to my colleague here, but the problem, and so then in Roman Catholicism, you have this tremendous gathering of canon law and all of these kinds of teachings that are considered to be authoritative by the church. Within certain Protestant traditions, you have traditions and understandings that are written. I'll take the United Methodist Church. I know that one well. The United Methodist Book of Discipline has a whole set of social principles that give guidance to that denomination, which are strongly contested, by the way, because people don't all agree on those things. The problem is we don't have this authoritative kind of body of material within Christianity except for 27 books of scripture. And they don't say anything about organ donation. So again, you have to extrapolate as the Imam's saying, but we don't have a council or a group that's getting together worldwide to say, okay, we all kind of agree on this idea. So yeah, I can say.
It's not as bad in Judaism. They say there's like 6 Jews in a room, there's 10 opinions.
Right, yeah, well, it's
you ever hear that?
Yeah, it's more, similar, but maybe a few more opinions within Christianity. So I had someone respond to the show. We talked about abortion on the last show, and I said there is just not an authoritative statement within that 27-book body of material. There's nothing about abortion within those 27 books. Someone wrote to me and said, hey, the Didache clearly says in chapter 2 that abortion is not allowed. And actually there are 3 pieces of material in the first 4 centuries that deal with it, not just the Didache, but 2 others. But they're not authoritative. They don't. I mean, we can use them as interesting material. The Didache was a piece of teaching material, but it's not authoritative for any. I mean, you can call it teaching, but it's just one more piece. It also, in the Didache, says if a preacher comes and wants to stay in your home and asks you to have a feast, you should put the feast together for them and have everything they want on the table on the spread and invite the whole town and let them preach and tell them, but if they eat any of the food, they're not a true disciple of the gospel, throw them out. And it's because they were coming in doing all. Well, it was a group. It was written by non-ministers who didn't want to be abused by ministers. So it's a fascinating document, but it's not authoritative for anybody really. So anyway,
we have a few minutes. We have a little time left, and we want to end on a real zinger here. That we did a show last Sunday. We did our show on healthcare because we feel it's an important issue for our country, and we hear religious voices that we don't necessarily think are the majority of religious voices. So we'd like to spend a couple minutes talking about what do religious groups say about the current healthcare debate? What's the responsibility of physicians and the community and the government and the public. So how about taking that reference since, you don't want to?
Really?
You want to start it, Mom? Okay.
I mean, are we doing youngest first?
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I mean, it is interesting to see the debate, and there are no easy answers for the economic dimension of it, the cost, the logistical, but at the bottom of this heap of questions is a very basic question. Does every human being deserve to get basic health care? For us, that's no-brainer. Every human being has the right in our world today, not just in our country, to get basic health care. We're not talking about, very expensive, complicated procedures that are optional at the end of life that cost, we're talking about something that is normal, general, that everybody should get. As long as society, and it differs from one society to another, what they can offer the citizens. It should not be a question that some people go with no health care whatsoever, and they wait till they get really sick and end up in the ER, and then, we all have to pay for it, and we have to treat something that could have been prevented or treated easily. So we can ignore it. It's not going to go away. It's going to get worse. We believe in Islam there are some basic human rights. In addition to the ones we know, the basic right for education, the basic right for healthcare. And it should not be a business that people take advantage of and overcharge for it. And not everybody can afford to pay high premiums for insurance. So we feel that if there is a mechanism that allows that to happen, it should take place. I'm not advocating a single-payer system, or all these are different strategies to address the need. There are different ways that can achieve the same outcome, and that is every person should get their basic health care.
And we're you okay? We're we don't. I'm not an expert in healthcare plans. None of us that are up here are, but there is some amount of agreement that I know in Jewish tradition it is the responsibility of the community to provide health care. It is in Jewish tradition a basic human right. And Judaism speaks about the dangers of creating a system that is a business. And when it becomes a business, the patient loses, the doctor loses, the healthcare providers lose. I don't know if they knew about insurance companies. Maybe they're the only ones that gain. But, and I'm not, it's not pejorative against insurance companies, but also in Jewish tradition, it becomes a basic responsibility, like that idea, don't live in a community that doesn't have a doctor. And by the way, for those of you who are physicians and healthcare providers, you'll be happy to say that Judaism is very clear up until the 16th century that the physician is required to treat the person, but the community is required to pay the person for the services. So it becomes the community's responsibility in that system to make the payment to the physician, and the physician becomes required to heal the person. It's a mandate in Jewish tradition. And there's, without getting too complicated, there's many, many examples in our tradition of that kind of collective responsibility that people aren't on their own. It becomes a basic human right in Jewish tradition that people are entitled. And there's actually a section in the tradition that says that if you don't provide them for health care, you are like a thief because you are stealing away their health from them. If the community does not provide it for the person, you become charged with theft. You are literally stealing the health from the person.
I would say, agreeing with my colleagues here, that this is one area that we have sort of a unanimous sense of agreement on. And I would say generally Christianity, I mean, one of the questions we want to ask is who would Jesus heal? But there's a great story among the many healing stories about a man called the Gerasene or the Gergesene demoniac, and he's living among the tombs, and he's obviously vexed, and probably it's mental illness. We don't know what's going on with him. But there's an encounter with Jesus. the demons that are inside of him, whatever it is vexing him. And you guys are like this. Jesus sends them into a herd of swine, and they run into the ocean. Okay, all right. So, but pigs can swim, so they probably just swam to the other side. But anyway, but anyway, the point is that this man became calm and healed and was okay. And it's interesting that this happened across the sea from the area that's generally considered was kind of the center of Jesus' ministry in those days, and it was a kind of a foreign area, but it's the earliest. There's a city called Hippus, which represents the earliest Christian church in the history of Christianity in that center at Hippus. It's kind of an interesting relationship. But what I think we do agree on is that the community is better when people are cared for well, when people have access to health care and healing and the needs are met, that it's a better community, that better things happen, that people experience more of a sense of safety and well-being. And we feel better about ourselves when we know that our neighbor, our sister, our brother, the person down the street is receiving the care that they need, whatever it may be. And so I think it's a vexing issue for us as Americans right now, but we have to find the way. And I do think the religious conversation is
I think it's been lacking in the whole debate. I feel that there's not been that sort of religious perspective. So I'll leave you also with a story, because we have to share stories. Is that the story that's used for the healthcare discussion in Jewish tradition is about the 3 people that are in a boat and they're going across the ocean. Some of you probably know this story. And they're going along nicely. Everyone's happy in the boat. They're all dry. They're all eating. They're all okay. The guy gets up and opens the toolbox. He takes a drill. And he starts drilling under his own seat in the boat. And the other people look at him and say, "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" And the story is the guy says to them, "Why is it your problem? I'm only drilling under my own seat." So that's sort of the rabbinic story that's used, is that we all live in the same world unless we think that we can be compartmentalized in some way, either as physicians or hospitals or insurance companies or patients or whatever it is. We are in the same boat. So take your choice of, one person starts to drill the hole in the boat, whoever it is, then the whole boat's going to sink. And that's part of the perspective of Jewish tradition.
I mean, we take certain things for granted, a police service, a fire department in every neighborhood. If there is a fire, that they're going to come. But if someone can probably defend themselves and not need the police, or someone may escape a fire on their own. But if they are sick, most people can't heal themselves. They need the services of a doctor if they can't afford it. And you hear stories every day of women with children who have no money and no insurance, and they want to go to take their children, and they can't. So it becomes a burden on the system. They have to wait till the child is really sick, we are not curing the problem or treating the problem, or just going around it. We need to face it head on. Since the creation of the insurance system, we have created really a monster. A third party that's neither the doctor nor the patient, who is profiting from the process, and in my humble opinion, not really contributing much to either improving medicine or the service, nor the helping the patient. So,
isn't your wife's a physician, your mother-in-law, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
my wife is here. She's a physician. I don't think. I think doctors will make more if there is no intermediary who is making billions of dollars in profit every year. Okay. It's not a business. It's not where the business should be. Like the rabbi said, it's the responsibility of the community to pay the doctor for their services, but it's the responsibility of the doctor never to have to think twice about, should I treat this patient? Does he have insurance? That's not should be their concern. They are trained to deal with it.
So we have 10 minutes left, and we're going to sort of open it up to whatever questions you have, right? 10 to 8? Are we okay, Dr. Whitney? Okay. And so we're going to open up to your questions, statements, challenges, maybe things that you think that if you have suggestions that you would like to see us. We've only been doing our show 5 months now, it's April, for 6 months. And so we're pretty new at this, so if you maybe have suggestions, and then you will be required to tune in, of course. But if you do have suggestions of the kind of things that you would like us to talk about, or we have a whole schedule already for the next year, but certainly we're always open to suggestions and things that you would like to hear discussed from a religious perspective.
Here, and here.
Dr. Hamilton.
Pretty clear that you appreciate each other and enjoy each other's company, even respect each other's opinions. How deeply do you trust each other?
With my life, I mean, literally.
That deep.
These are.
I trust this person like my family member.
I think we have been tested before, and we feel we have grown to become stronger brothers than our own. So we believe that has to come across. It should not be spoken about, but we want the community and the listeners to feel it, to see it, and to themselves think that that's possible. In our world today of such diverse populations, that there's hope. We can agree to disagree. We can live in harmony, and we can resolve our differences, in very respectful ways without having to say, my way is the only way, and you're all wrong.
When you respect someone, you feel like you're really being listened to and understood and not judged. I think that's where, and for a lot of other reasons, based on your question, is that I think where that trust comes from.
Yeah, and I can say personally, and I think we've all experienced it, often if I'm going through something difficult, the two of the first phone calls I get are from these colleagues and brothers of mine. So there's a very deep trust and friendship.
Have you done a show on mental illness, and what sense do your different faith positions address the issue of mental illness?
We haven't yet.
We did on disabilities, yeah.
And we did one on disabilities, but not on mental illness per se. And actually, I think that we've had that suggestion before, so it sounds like maybe because they listen to us and they think they really should do a show on mental illness. And I'm not trying to be flip because it's a huge issue. And I mean, I sort of touched on it when I talked about this story out of the gospel that talks about this man who's possessed. And we have lots of folks that are not being cared for at all. But it's a huge issue, and it's a huge issue in families in terms of how to deal with that. It's a hidden issue. People are ashamed of having to talk about it or deal with it or acknowledge it, and yet it is a part of life. It's like I say, if you have a broken arm, you're not going to just let it dangle. You're going to go get some help and get it cared for, and the same is true of emotional and mental.
I think faith traditions do have something to say about it.
Absolutely.
There's some history of it.
Yeah. Historically, it has been treated as, something that's different from physical ailments. And lately, it has become more acceptable to understand that it is a treatable or at least containable, and that it should be addressed in that way. And there is nothing wrong with someone who has, physical illness or mental illness. It should be addressed and treated.
Right, that's a good suggestion.
If we move from this taboo, which, by the way, still on many medical illnesses, if you have HIV, there's all kinds of perceptions about it. But as we know of more and more cases which tell us it could happen to anyone, then we can be open and have more scientific discussion rather than these taboos.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask this question because I went as a midwife when I was in England, just over a short time. And when I heard your interpretation of life, when life actually begins, kingdom. And as a Christian, life actually begins because that's upon common as I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I heard when you mentioned something about authority. The Ten Commandments is our guide, and I'm sure the Jewish religion too. The Ten Commandments is that guidelines for you too?
Yes. However,
Although they're different.
yeah, many people don't know that that doesn't mean that we commit adultery or, But actually, a couple comments about that, which is like the difference of interpretation. You raise a really, really good question because there's been a debate about putting the Ten Commandments in courtrooms. There is a different set of Ten Commandments. Our commandment in Judaism is, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. That does not exist and you should remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt. It does not exist in the Christian Ten Commandments. And, for instance, our Hebrew word, lo tirtzach, is often translated in Christian Bibles as do not kill. In Judaism, it's do not murder, which is really more true to the Hebrew. I'm not saying that wrong. It's difference of interpretation. So even something as basic as the Ten Commandments has differences of understanding. And I respect where you stand, where life begins, and so we can dialogue and discuss, not trying to change your opinion, but how does that affect, therefore, what we think and what we believe and what we believe the government should do or not do and all of that. And that's part of, all these things are based on principles like when does life begin? These are where all the differences lie. But that doesn't mean we can't discuss it. I'm not going to try to change your opinion. I'm going to say I respect where it is. So now let's talk about how does that work in the real life and how do we decide things and all that.
So it affects us. If the government is going to take that definition and say life begins at conception and then imposes on you, the doctors and the medical professionals, and on me as a citizen, and then if I'm a woman and I get raped, I have no choice but to live with it. But in Islam, because I know that I have that window of 6 weeks, I can do whatever I need to, pill, the morning after pill, or within those 6 weeks to end that possible pregnancy and don't have to live with that nightmare that reminds me of a very violent event in my life, an incest. So it gives us that window. And we believe that to us is a religious right. So while we respect your point of view, we believe the government should stay out of it and not define when life begins for you and me. For you, it's at conception. For me, at those 42 nights.
I agree with you totally, but I know, and trust me, I'm very open-minded. I just brought the question up because of thou shalt not kill. But,
Thou shalt not murder.
okay.
It doesn't say because if someone comes to attack you, you have a right to kill another person to defend yourself. That's a right in Jewish tradition. So we're in war. If you can't kill, then you can't kill. You take another life, but murder is different than killing. That doesn't mean you go and randomly kill. But there are situations where it's necessary, and that word from Hebrew is just translated as murder. It can't be there's a different word in the original Hebrew, because language is an interpretation.
Into the Septuagint, which is what
Greek translation,
which is a Greek translation
from the Hebrew.
Text, then the word was translated into the King James version, which was taken from Latin. So now you're three languages away, and into English, which is the fourth, to kill. But that's not the proper translation. So I mean, when you get into texts, it's very complicated stuff, and there's a lot of discussion to be had. But, yeah.
So for me, in diversity and inclusion is what we do here at Florida Hospital. Knowledge and learning to grow is what we do every day. To really learn more about each other's differences, each other's similarities. But that can go on and on and on and on. I'm like, it's nice to hear about the different perspectives. Yes, Christianity is really difficult. We are all here. However, I think the biggest puzzle that people need to solve is to really just find where is you know, and that's where that respect will live, that's where that trust will live, because that's how we will all have conversation. Because there will be not enough time in this world, in this lifetime, to learn about everybody's similarities, everybody's differences. But what is it that I can do? I can learn from you today, so that I can work with you and we can be.
I think there's a lot of, I mean, you're sitting in this room in a hospital that its whole mission is to preserve and save life. I don't think that any of us, whatever our religious tradition is, that we would disagree with that. We may disagree with nuances of, you know, when it begins, but in terms of saving life and health, I don't think that we would. So the basic human questions of life, I think, are the same for most of us, of all religious traditions.
One of our old shticks that we've done over the years is called more alike than different, and we spend time really talking about that common ground issue. So, and believe me, we find lots of common ground when we work together.
We just worked hard tonight to try to show that.
Yeah, the basic thing is that not to believe that we will ever get to a place that we agree on everything. It's not possible. We have to learn to accept our differences and respect those differences and get along and be in harmony and not see that, you know, just because someone has a different opinion, that means they're totally wrong. We have no claim that what we follow is the only way.
Just one quick answer to that, I'm sorry, is that, you know, we all agree, the three of us, what binds us together is also that even though we have different religions, we all ultimately believe the same thing, is that whatever way that we find is we all have the same end point. We're trying to be the best people that we can be, fulfill our potential, and we're trying to make the world better. I mean, making the world better when we're not here anymore and that we all make a difference is pretty common. And it may be as a Muslim or as a Jew or as a Christian or as a non-believer, whatever it is, we all sort of have the same goal, but we have different paths to get there. And I think that's where some of the respect comes from. 8 o'clock. Okay.
There's not enough time, I know, to be able to talk about this and address it, but I think it'd be a fascinating topic for program. That is, I don't know if all faith traditions experience this, but it seems as though frequently some of the strongest feelings in faith tend to happen toward other people of faith as opposed to, say, a non-believer. In other words, what I mean by that is, for many it seems like if you were to take two people, one of them is, let's say, doesn't believe in God at all, and another one does believe in God, but they have very different beliefs than you do about God. It seems likely that there would be far more conflict or disagreement or even animosity or hatred that would build with this person who also believes in God, but they believe differently than I do, where this person over here just says, I don't even think there is a God. And so it's almost like, oh, okay, well, fine, you know, whatever. But yet another person of faith, if they believe something different than I do, might be much more likely to have such strong feelings of animosity. But, and I'm not speaking of me personally, but I say in general, it just seems as though often believers are much more likely to become angry with other believers than they are about someone who just says.
Some believers are open to listening.
I just want to say briefly, I think what I find is when I talk to a practitioner of their faith, it's different than talking to someone who tells me what they believe. It's a very different reality with someone who's a practitioner.
I don't think there is a monopoly for anyone on interpreting God. So what happens when you interpret God or God's word different than me, I feel, no, you're wrong. My version of it is the right one. But what we try to do here, that we're also, speaking on behalf of God from 3 different scriptures, we don't believe that we have a monopoly on interpreting the intent of God and what God really said. So we try our best. We learn from each other. I learn from the rabbi a lot, with the interpretations. Like the word he just mentioned, we have the same commandment, but often we use conveniently what's in English, not to kill, but it's really not to murder. And so I learned something today.
We want to thank you. We hope you tune in and listen. We thank you for your patience and understanding. We thank you for Dr. Guarnari, who was the one who brought us here. And we'd like to thank the hospital for really arranging this and making the time, and for you taking the time to come out.
We would like to thank you.
Thank you.
Number one, I know how busy you guys are. And spending an hour and 45 minutes, almost 2 hours doing this with is a significant amount. But even more significant is how you mentored to us on how to be different, but yet have a dialogue at the same time to get to know one another. So I think that's important. And the final thing that you've done is you've really begun the dialogue from a religious standpoint with people in the field of medicine. And I would love to continue that dialogue because we interface in so many important ways together. So thank you so much for this historical moment.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I saw him coming.
Website, and we have classes on the website. That's my home hospital.
Okay,
I live
good.
around the corner.
Oh, that's good. So then
Thank you.
we would. And I'm sure we will need you.
It really highly, Mandarin. And I found that to be such a site music that heard about you guys some time ago.
There are fellow travelers out there, who understand that we're all on a journey. We may come out of different places.
Respect is a big thing.
That's wonderful. So he was where you live.
Yeah, it's a small little town, I think 30,000.